Hey, folks. Thanks for being here again on Politics Chat on Thursday, October 23rd this time. Who we got? We got Laconia, New Hampshire, Waco, Texas, the home of Doris Miller, among other things. Lots and lots of stuff happened in Waco, Texas over the years. It's funny how often it comes up. I hope you learn that in your schools anyway. Wisconsin, Alberta, Iowa, which, by the way, I misspell that contraction the abbreviated version of the state every freaking time I write it. I always go I-O, and it's I-A. Indiana, Georgia, Salt Lake City, Pittsburgh, Kansas City, Newton, Massachusetts, my sometimes home, Port Hudson was that went by, Pleasant, New Jersey, Port Orange, Florida. Greenville, Kentucky did somebody say Facebook is here? I'm not seeing you yet. Brighton, Michigan, I've been there. Mountain Home, Arizona, have not been there. Arizona is such a beautiful state. Katy, Texas, Lansing, Michigan, been there. Gainesville, Florida, been there too. But every time I go to Florida, all the alligators go away. I've never seen an alligator in Florida. It became such a joke with a dear old friend that he actually gave me an alligator pin at one point, because I used to say, those things aren't really real. You can't prove it by me. They exist. All right. Pennsylvania, San Francisco Bay Area, Williamstown, Massachusetts. Where are our Facebook people? Mission Viejo, Atlanta, Minneapolis, North Carolina. 2 Minneapolises right next to each other. Charleston, West Virginia, Wilmington, North Carolina, great town. Guam. One of my dear friends from high school lived in Guam. And we've lost touch. I wonder if you know her. Facebook is there. All right, somebody says you're here. Okay, let me get right down into the questions that you asked, which tend to center around a couple of very visible things, but I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into them today. So let's start with whether what is really going on with Trump's destruction of the East Wing of the White House is about the underground bunker that's there. Let's step back for a minute. Please stop attributing any specific plans to anything Donald Trump does. He is mentally incapacitated. He is not able to formulate a plan. He's talked about getting rid of or putting that ballroom near the East Wing. And then 2 days after the No Kings protests saw at least 7 million people turning out to oppose his administration, one of the biggest protests in American history. All of a sudden, Monday morning, he takes backhoes and destructive trucks to the East Wing of the White House and tears the whole thing down. Does that sound to you like there was a plan behind that? I mean, he wanted to build his ballroom the same way he's wanted to do all these other projects he's talked about, the Arch and redoing the Kennedy Center. And, he has all these plans, but boy, did that look like somebody was just lashing out. There is no weatherproofing there, even though we're going into winter. There did not appear to be any attempts to mitigate what is probably asbestos in the place. I mean, it looks like he just went after it because he was pissed off. Now, that being said, under the East Wing is where the bunkers were in case they were built during World War II and improved on since then, because the president needs a safe place to be. Now, is that why he's tearing it down? I don't know. Have you seen plans? There are no plans yet. There's nothing that has gone through anything official. There hasn't been any money appropriated by Congress. Those ideas are all supposed to run through congressional committees. Nothing's happened there. I'm seeing a lot of stuff on social media about how this is what he's really going to do. He's going to hide in this bunker. And then, some people are even suggesting that the money that the Trump administration is giving to Argentina, the $40 billion, is a down payment on him having a place to run to when he needs to escape the United States. I don't know, maybe. But that seems to me to be borrowing an awful lot of trouble in this moment. And one of the things you can't afford to do right now is to borrow trouble. I promise you, they are not going to rebuild that bunker in the next month. And we need one anyway, by the way. You want a place for the principles of the country to be safe in case of an attack or whatever. So I would not spend a lot of time worrying a great deal about that. Now, other people asked about what happened to the artwork in the East Wing and the paintings, the artifacts. It was a beautiful space. It really was. I've been in it. And the answer to that is we don't know. And, I sort of said last night, we don't know what happened. And somebody said, oh, yeah, they took care of that stuff. Well, did they? That should have had art curators. It should have had archivists. It should have had architectural historians. It should have had real care taken to preserve what was left of American history in that building, if indeed the American people, as represented by the Congress, decided to take it down. What we got instead was jackhammers. So maybe everything was preserved, but I don't see why it would have been. That is, you don't, like, you and I can't just go take the paintings off the walls and throw some stuff in bubble wrap, that actually takes people who are trained to do that. And that's not trained as in a 2-week course. Archivists, art historians, the people who care for fine art and the fine objects, like there was a very fine piano there. They're not somebody you hire off the street. Those are professionals. And of course, this administration has been firing them. So I have no more information than anybody else does, but if there had been a real attempt to safeguard the things that were in that East Wing, don't you think we'd have seen moving vans the way we see when a president leaves the White House or moves into the White House? Remember all the vans that go through and you see people moving stuff? There was none of that I saw. Not to say, I suppose it could have happened, but no sign of it. So my guess is that the material that was in there has been stored probably in a spare room or whatever, and that some of it's never going to be found again. Some of it really will turn up missing, the stuff that people thought was not important enough to bother to take good care of. So I don't know. But I'm really suspicious because in order to do that correctly, that would have taken a long time and it would have taken professionals. And I have seen no evidence of that at all. There should be catalogs. There should be, I'll stop, but you get the message there. So I don't know the answer to that, but that's where I am with that. I will say I am heartbroken over what has happened to the East Wing of the White House. But I will also say, and the Rose Garden, by the way, but I will also say that history is about people. Like, for all that we care, many of us care about the objects that history represents or that represent history. History is really about people. So we have sustained a terrible loss in the United States with the loss of the East Wing under the circumstances that we have lost it. But we can rebuild, and not necessarily am I just referring to the East Wing, obviously. We still have control over what our future looks like. And it's not, if you will excuse me, in my future going to be that goddamn ballroom. We're going to put something there that represents the American people. With luck, better even than the East Wing did. So I'm heartbroken over it, but I'm also looking to the future on that one. And as I say, on the Rose Garden, I have in my when I'm playing around at night, usually in bed, I think about making the world a bit of a better place, and I imagine what that Rose Garden could be if we used it for something like all the old traditional roses or the history of roses in America, because of course there are all kinds of new exciting varieties, and you sort of think of making it a people's Rose Garden again. All right. So a lot of people ask questions about Adelita Grijalva of Arizona, a Democrat, and what we can do to get her sworn in. And that's really complicated. And somebody seemed very angry that Hakeem Jeffries wasn't doing more than he is to get her sworn in. In fact, the Arizona senators have confronted Johnson, but they really have no legal power at all, because the Speaker of the House is the one who gets to determine things like the swearing in of a member of Congress. And somebody asked if that has ever ever been delayed in the way that it is now. Not since 1969, I'm sorry, off the top of my head. In the past, there have been occasions on which the Congress has decided not to seat somebody who has apparently been elected to Congress, and they have not done so either because of opposition politically to that person or because of challenges to whether or not that election was legitimate. And beginning in I believe it's 1969, the Congress passed a law saying, "Oh, come on, you have to swear in somebody who has been legitimately elected and been certified by their state." And so, no, Johnson is on untrodden ground here, and it's there. There is already a lawsuit about it. The Arizona Secretary of State has sued, along with Grijalva herself, to say you can't do this, and asking a court to assign somebody else to swear her into office, because until she is sworn into office, she's no different than you or me in terms of working for her constituents. She doesn't have phones, she doesn't have computers, she doesn't have a staff, she doesn't have any of that stuff. She needs to be sworn in. Now, Johnson is trying to tell people that he is following what he calls the Pelosi precedent, because she took a number of weeks, he has now passed that, to swear in a Republican member of Congress from Louisiana. And the huge difference there is that Nancy Pelosi called that new representative-elect and asked when she would like to be sworn in, and swore her in on that date. That was the date that she picked. And Grijalva said, "That's great. You want to call me and ask when I want to be sworn in? Right now sounds good." So so that's what's going on there. There is a lawsuit, but there's really nothing legally that that the other members of Congress can do. Certainly, the majority in Congress could get rid of the speaker, but that would take eight Republicans turning against him. And so far, there's no sign that they're going to do it. And it would require the Senate, or the House, I'm sorry, actually being at work, which it's not right now. He has kept it out of they're technically in session. We haven't ended a Congress, but they're not working and haven't been working for much of the period since August, actually, in part because of the same reason he doesn't want to swear in Grijalva. He does not want the discharge petition that will force a vote on the Epstein files to go in front of the House of Representatives. And the reason for that is twofold. One is because we know, thanks to reporting from the Wall Street Journal, and because of a non-answer we got from Attorney General Pam Bondi when she was testifying in front of Congress, we know that Donald Trump is in those files. And the extraordinary lengths to which they are going to keep them under wraps suggests that whatever's in there is pretty bad. And so Johnson doesn't want it to go forward for that reason. He also doesn't want it to go forward because a lot of Republicans will vote in favor of the release of those Epstein files, because, of course, that was their promise when they were elected in 2024. And because their constituents, especially their far-right constituents, really want to see what's in them. You know, they really feel strongly about that. And the last I saw, and I haven't looked at this statistic for a while, but the last statistic I saw was that 78% of Americans want those files to be released. So that's something that obviously Johnson is trying desperately to keep from happening. So a couple more things here. You asked about the 2026 election and what's going to happen with the 2026 election. And you also asked in that context about Steve Bannon's statement today that Donald Trump would run again in 2028, and they had a plan for that. Now, let's step back just a little bit on that and start from the premise again. And one of the things I was thinking about talking today, and I was thinking one of the things that's always worth thinking about is, if you were going to do something, how would you do it? Because that shows you how much of stuff that you're afraid of maybe doesn't come to pass. So, like literally, one of the things that I would used to say to my students, you know, if you got to start a movement, how are you going to do it? Like literally, how are you going to do it? Well, you know, you're going to find a friend or two and you're going to start talking. But, you know, pretty soon, for example, you need to be able to identify other people who think like you do. So what are you going to do? Maybe clothes, maybe a flag. But if it's going to be a flag, it's going to be a really simple flag because you got to be able to just do it really quickly. If it's a popular flag, you just work through how you would literally do something. So in the case of Trump running again, literally, how would you do that? There is a constitutional amendment saying he can't. However, we already have a blueprint that he tried in 2020, which was that they would simply refuse to recognize the legitimate election of a Democrat. And that I think we can absolutely see coming, not least because of the fact that the administration is putting election deniers into important places. They're trying to get rid of voting rights in a number of states. They're trying to gerrymander the states in such a way that the Republicans get a huge leg up. The Supreme Court is certainly considering throwing out the Voting Rights Act, which will give the Republicans another 19 seats, up to 19 seats in the House of Representatives. You can see the steel already going into place. That's a real problem that I'll talk about more and write about more in the future, because I want to get something in before that today. But now let's think about really what that looks like in 2020. In 2028, about Trump running again. What does that really look like? Do you really think they're going to be able to prop him up and be even vaguely coherent in 3 more years? I don't. I don't know if you watched his press conference today, but it was bonkers. I mean, the man is not okay. And so if you're worried about 2028, once again, I think that, and Trump, that's probably borrowing trouble in the case of Trump. But the problem in the terms of the skewing of our system, so that whichever Democrat, I'm sorry, I keep doing that because I'm going to want to talk about the Democrats, whichever Republican wins is automatically going to win. That's really concerning. And that's what a number of people, including me, are very, very worried about. Now, again, we're hearing a lot about the 2026 election. That was 2028. Now, the 2026 election, and somebody wrote to me, didn't put it on there, but wrote to me and asked a great question about what the Democrats should do in terms of their ideology going into 2026, this one coming up. And this is very dear to my heart because I'm seeing a lot of discussion within the Democratic Party and to the left of it about whether the Democrats should go centrist or whether they should go progressive. And I have a really hard time with this argument, not least because I'm not paying a lot of attention to the structure of the Democratic Party right now. But because what does that look like? What does that mean in today's America to go centrist? And I think what people, and I could be wrong, but I think what people mean is to be more like the Republicans, to try and pick up Republican voters by kind of wiggling over toward the Republicans. And what I would say to that is that the Republican Party currently has veered so far to the right, it's off the cliff. And to be a centrist American right now is to embrace the policies that are being talked about as if they're progressive, as if they are somehow on the left. And they're really not. The idea of taxing people more progressively than they currently are, so that the wealthier people pay more in taxes. So our world looks much more like it did under George W. Bush, for example, hardly a left-wing reactionary, or under in the 1990s, when we'd last had a budget surplus under Clinton, looking like that is extraordinarily popular. So I would call that centrist. Higher taxes on the wealthy is a really popular position. What about things like healthcare? Do we go? What does centrist mean in a world in which the Republicans are trying to cut Medicaid dramatically and throw millions of people off their health care? To me, centrist says people should have health care. And by the way, the person who first suggested that in the United States is Theodore Expletive Roosevelt, more than 120 years ago. He was a Republican president at the beginning of the 20th century. That, to me, does not say progressive. in a derogatory sense, that says centrist. So when people say, "What should the Democrats do?" What I look at in this moment is the 1850s, because in that moment we had something that looks very similar, I think, to where we are today. That is, the Democrats in that period, the parties have switched sides. The Democrats in that period had fallen under the control of a very small group of elite slave enslavers who were um, really, really, really wealthy and really controlled the American economy. And they basically said, "Hey, it's our country. We get to run it however we want. We're going to spread human enslavement into the American West. We're going to take over the North through the House of Representatives, and we're going to start." And you can read this, by the way. It's in things like the Cornerstone speech by Alexander Stevens. We're going to run the world because we have all the money, and we're going to enslave people all over the world. That's not the way they put it, but that's this is the great future they kept talking about. And when that happened, people in the North who recognized that they were going to lose access to the American West and lose democracy in the American North said, "No, you're not going to do that. Even though we have been voting Democratic or voting Whig, which were the opponents of the Democrats, we're pissed off that the Whigs are not taking a stronger stand, and we're sure not going to cooperate with the Democrats." And they came together as what were known as the anti-Nebraska parties. I'm not going to go into the Kansas-Nebraska Act right now, but they went into these anti-Nebraska parties. And for 2 years, they didn't really have any idea yet except what they weren't. It's going to be Abraham Lincoln who decides to articulate what they are for. But when that happened, the people who stood up and said, "We believe in equality before the law. We believe in the idea of equal access to resources. We believe in the idea that we have a say in our government, and we are opposed to oligarchy," those people won. They won across the board, even in the states that were dominated by the Democrats, who were thoroughly racist at the time. This idea that somehow the Democrats, the Northerners, were all in favor of Black rights in 1860s, just in the 1850s, is just completely wrong. And similarly in Massachusetts, for example, the laws that they were passing there were fervently anti-Irish. So the idea that people were in favor of equal rights is just wrong. What they were in favor of was the idea that they were not going to lose their democracy to an oligarchy. But crucially, there was huge push from the American people for people to stand up and to fight for those principles. Now, what does that look like in 2025? To me, it looks like fighting back against the things that we're seeing out of the White House right now. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, and to fight for the things that we care about: education, healthcare, equal access to resources, equal treatment before the law, no more special interests running our government. All those things that have really, really wide support among the country. So this division between, first of all, I don't know what centrist means in a world where all the positions that are identified in many media sources are actually, as progressive, are actually shared by more than 70% of Americans. That sounds pretty centrist to me. But I think what they mean is cozying up to the positions that Republicans have taken in the hopes that somehow that will peel away Republican voters. And I'm just not sure that's the case. I think that Republican voters are upset by corruption and by the takeover of our system by the wealthy and by the lack of health care and by the lack of education and so on, as Democratic voters are. They just need to have people stand up and articulate that. Now, again, you asked the question, that's where I am on that issue. And let me just go a little further than you asked about. And that's that, what does that mean? Does it mean we shut up the candidates who are farther to the left and we move to the candidates that are farther to the right? I maintain that we need all of the voices, especially right now, but we need all of those voices participating in our government right now, because they're waking people up to issues they didn't even know they cared about, and they're making people understand that those issues could be addressed at the state or the national level or the local level. And so I'm not a big believer in silencing new voices, especially voices you don't like. I think those are very, very welcome. It's important, though, to remember that in order to get things through a state house or through Congress, you need to know what you're doing. You need to be able to make compromises. You need to understand the different areas of the country. You need to understand what it is possible to get through, and you have to be willing to work to build the structures that will enable you to do that. So, as you know, if you listen to me, I care very deeply about American taxation and how it has been really perverted, I think, over the last 40 years. And, if I could wave a magic wand, that's what I would do first. I would fix American taxation. Well, you know what? I can't wave a magic wand. In order to get something like that through the Congress, you've got to change who's in the Congress. And in order to change who's in the Congress, you have to change who's in the state houses. Because in order to get it through Congress, you've got to get rid of partisan gerrymandering. And you've got to get rid of a Supreme Court that is going to support that kind of partisan gerrymandering. And that kind of slow building work over a generation is not something that is in my wheelhouse. And it's not something I think the Democrats have been very good at. So one of the things that it's important to remember in the next couple of years is, yes, we want all those voices, but we need those voices to recognize what it takes to build a governmental movement, because throwing bombs just doesn't do anything. You need to be able to get in there and work with people, which, by the way, is one of the reasons that I won't run for office. Can you imagine me doing something like that? And the answer to that is I do not have the skill set to sit in a room for a year negotiating over beef prices. I just don't. But there are people who do, and they're very good at it, and more power to them. All right, so that's maybe more than you wanted to know about that, but I want to go on a little bit more here with what's happening in the White House and across the country. So, again, if you are watching Trump, you know he is making more and more erratic claims. He is claiming more and more power that is extraordinary, including today. And not only did he tear down the East Wing of the White House, but he has doubled down on the idea that without any input from Congress, and certainly without a declaration of war, he can continue to make strikes against unnamed, unidentified people in small boats in the Caribbean and now in the Pacific. And that is the declaration that a president can simply declare to kill people. And the implication next is that he can do the same thing in the United States of America. This is extraordinary. It is unacceptable. And it's something to be screaming very loudly about. Is even Rand Paul says, we don't know who those people were. We literally do not know. The Trump administration says they were murderers, they were narco terrorists. We have absolutely no idea who they were. And again, the crimes for which he is executing them without any kind of due process do not generally carry a life sentence, a death sentence. So this is really far out there. And one of the things that has jumped out lately is that Trump's numbers, which were always poor, except at the very beginning, are now abysmal. They are incredibly low. And people are frightened of what he's doing. Most people think that he is acting dictatorially. They don't like it. They want that to stop. And you can start to see that there is pushing back on some of what he is doing and increasing, again, little flickers. But you're seeing, for example, in Indiana, he's putting huge pressure on Indiana to gerrymander that state to pick up one more Republican seat there for 2026. And Indiana sure looks like it's not going to do it. Indiana, despite the fact it has a strong Republican Party there. You're also seeing the fact that today a member of the Department of Justice said he or she, I don't know who it was, could not indict Adam Schiff, that the senator from California. The evidence wasn't strong enough. Now that person is going to be replaced almost certainly. But you're starting to see people recognize that those people who still have a choice about whether or not to be implicated in the crimes that the administration is committing are starting to back away. And the more those people back away and say, we don't want to be any part of that, the more power will go to places like Illinois, where J.B. Pritzker today, the governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker today established a commission to keep records of what the ICE agents are doing in Illinois and other federal agents are doing in Illinois so that they can be brought to justice under a different Department of Justice. You're starting to see real concerted pushback on this incredibly unpopular government. You got to remember that dictatorships almost exclusively rise when the dictator is popular because people support what he is doing. In this case, Trump is unpopular. People don't support what he is doing. So there is still room to push back against him. Now, in terms of that, lots of people frustrated, feeling like nobody's doing enough. I will tell you, a lot of people are doing a lot of things, and you should not feel as if nothing is getting done. And this is everywhere from in Capitol Hill, where the Democrats really are trying to throw sand in the gears of what the Republicans are doing. It's also happening in the state houses. It's also happening in social media. It's happening in the streets. There is a lot of pushback, but you want something special to do? Feel like your time is being well spent? Stop worrying about 2026 and 2028 and who the candidates might be then or might not be or how we should handle that. Focus on the fact that we have a major election coming up in this country in about 2 weeks, and that is the November elections of 2025 this year, in which there are 52,000 races on the ballot. And those races are incredibly important. So in Maine, for example, while everybody's focusing on who's going to be running for senator, which, by the way, the primaries aren't until next June. We have on the ballot this next month a question of whether or not we're going to dramatically limit absentee ballots. Why does that matter? 40% of voters in Maine use absentee ballots. You get rid of that, you've dramatically cut down on who votes in the state of Maine. And that will matter now, of course, but it will in 26, but it will also, it'll matter in 2026. It will also matter in 2028 when, the Republicans will have cut a number of Democratic voters out of the ballot. So if you care about what's going to happen down the road, focus in places like Maine where that's happening. Pennsylvania, there are 3 state Supreme Court justices on the ballot. Another case where people aren't really paying attention to those races, but they must be paying attention to those races because that's going to determine who gets to vote and what gerrymandering might look like going forward in the key swing state of Pennsylvania. 2 gubernatorial races in New Jersey and Virginia coming up in November. You've got, as I say, races all over this country. You've got Proposition 50, I think it is, in California about pushing back against the gerrymandering that Texas did. So if you're really worried about what 2026 might look like or what 2028 might look like, your moment is now to look in November, because the trick to the November elections, the November 2025 elections, is that most of them will be determined by turnout. So find an organization that is working on organizing people to get to the polls, to make them aware of what's at stake, to make sure they know it's important. Because in these off-year elections, usually Republican voters show up, Democratic voters do not. And as I keep saying, this election, and I suspect the next 2 elections, are not going to be partisan. They're about protecting our democracy. So you want to be voting for the pro-democracy candidates. And when that happens, in 2026, people who are running for office are going to say, whew, if I want votes, I better be protecting democracy as well. So for all the people who are like, what are we going to do? What can we do to stop him? And all sorts of, concerns about that. Literally, here's something you can do in the next 2 weeks to dramatically weaken Trump and the MAGA Republicans. And again, a really major showing in these elections across the country. These 52,000 elections are going to be a real sign of what's going to happen in 2026. So I really, really urge people to get out there, not just yourself, but make sure people know about these elections in your states. Get with the organizations that are fighting for those issues currently in those states, and and turn out to support the pro-democracy candidates. So, I always like to leave you on a note of hope, and it's been a hard week. I mean, watching the East Wing come down was a lot. It was a lot. And now, of course, Trump announcing he's going to kill people at will. That's a lot too. The fact that the House of Representatives is not in session and Mike Johnson suggests he's not going to bring it back into session, that's a lot as well. The pardons of George Santos, the person who was convicted of fraud for a former Republican from New York, and today's pardon of I think the founder of Binance, who was convicted of or pleaded guilty to money laundering, that was a lot too. But the only way out of all this is to go through it. And, we attribute that quotation to a lot of different people, but all the way back to Harriet Tubman before the Civil War, when she was getting people out of the American South to freedom. The only way out is through. And in our case, for all the really very visible things that are keeping our attention all the time, in part to keep our eyes off the Epstein files, there are a number of things that suggest this administration is not going to be able to pull it off. Not least the visuals of the East Wing, which have a lot of people upset. And by the way, I think this is interesting. One of the Republican lawmakers is circulating an image that he claims is what Barack Obama did to the White House when he added a basketball court to it. In fact, he's lying. What he is showing is the renovation of the entire East Wing in the 1950s. Barack Obama switched a tennis court to a basketball court. That's obviously a much smaller project than you're going to see circulating. And that does raise the question for me of why people who support Trump seem to be okay with being lied to. I'm not okay with being lied to, and that's going to be one of the things that we're really going to have to push. So going forward into these next 2 weeks, and then going into 2026 and 2028, we really want to make sure people see what's going on. The deaths without due process, the attacks of ICE and Border Patrol and so on in our cities, which, by the way, Trump backed off on today in San Francisco, probably because he doesn't want people to get really even angrier at him before California votes on whether or not to redistrict. That's almost certainly a one-to-one correspondence right there. He decided not to go in because people said to him, dude, you're going to lose this vote if you do that. Again, hammer on this stuff. Put up pictures of the White House being torn apart, of your memories of the White House. Put up things on social media that continually flood the zone, because this is how the MAGAs took power in the first place, and changing public opinion and making sure people are really aware of what's at stake is how we change it back. So for all that it's been a really rough week, it's also been a very hopeful week in the growing pressure on the administration and Trump's really nonsensical lashing out in such a dramatic way that we are now having to contend with the fact he is personally tearing down the White House. And it's hard to think of a more poignant symbol of what's happening to our country than that. And please just run with it. All right. I'm going to go on and do something else. Actually, I've got a gig I have to get to. Thank you for being here. And I will see you again very soon. If you have not seen the interview I did last night with Senator Andy Kim, just so you know, it was good. It's rare that they're not good, but he suddenly clicked into a different gear in the last third of it. And I thought it was one of the best interviews I'd ever done. So that might be worth taking a look at. Every once in a while, the universe aligns. And actually, if you watch that last part, you will see I'm barely breathing because I didn't want to knock him off his game when he was going. So that might be kind of fun. If you're looking for inspiration, it was kind of a magical moment. All right. Thanks for being here. And I'll see you again, probably on Saturday with Joanne, at least on Tuesday, and we'll keep you posted. Thanks for being here.